Trump's panicked White House seeks end to costly Iran war, how a 4-week campaign against Iran became a referendum on American power, oil markets, and Donald Trump himself. This war was supposed to last 4 weeks. Instead, 5 weeks later, Iran still has its uranium, the Strait of Hormuz is partially closed, oil just surged past $118 a barrel, and the White House is looking for a way out. So, what exactly went wrong? Wars that are meant to be brief often become instructive. They reveal not only the limits of military planning, but the fragility of political imagination. America's latest confrontation with Iran was conceived as a demonstration strike, swift, decisive, and psychologically overwhelming. 5 weeks later it looks increasingly like something else, a test of whether the United States can still coerce outcomes in the Middle East without paying the price of occupation, escalation, or humiliation. The answer, so far, appears to be no. What began as a 4-week punitive campaign to cripple Iran's nuclear infrastructure and destabilize its leadership has instead produced a strategic inversion. Iran still possesses enriched uranium. The Strait of Hormuz, the world's most sensitive energy choke point, has been effectively paralyzed. Oil prices are surging. And the White House, having promised decisive victory, now seems to be searching for an exit that does not look like one. This is not defeat. But it is unmistakably drifting, a war designed for television. Donald Trump's foreign policy has always favored spectacle over structure. His approach to coercion resembles branding more than doctrine: shock the opponent, dominate the narrative, declare success quickly and move on. The operation against Iran precisely followed this logic, fresh from what aides described as a daring operation against Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. The administration assumed Tehran would respond similarly, by collapsing psychologically under the pressure of rapid strikes and regime intimidation. Instead, Iran responded strategically rather than symbolically. Rather than defending every target, it targeted the global system. By threatening shipping through Hormuz, Tehran transformed a bilateral confrontation into a worldwide economic event. Oil markets reacted immediately. Aviation fuel concerns spread. Insurance premiums spiked. The conflict stopped being about centrifuges and started being about inflation. That shift matters politically more than militarily. Mr. Trump can tolerate foreign instability. He cannot tolerate rising petrol prices in Ohio. Hormuz as leverage, not battlefield. Iran's response illustrates a familiar asymmetry. It does not need to win militarily, it only needs to make victory expensive. Closing, or partially closing, the Strait of Hormuz is not merely a naval maneuver. It is a strategic language. It says, escalation will not remain local. It will become global. For Tehran, prolongation is leverage. For Washington, prolongation is liability. That imbalance explains why the White House now appears willing to redefine its objectives mid-campaign. Early rhetoric emphasized reopening the strait as a central war aim. More recent statements quietly downgraded it. The administration has begun suggesting that Britain and NATO partners should assume responsibility for restoring maritime traffic. This is burden sharing as an exit strategy, and it reveals something deeper. America is discovering that controlling escalation is harder than initiating it. The Marines arrive, but uncertainty follows. Military deployments tell their own story. The arrival of expeditionary marine units and airborne forces signals preparation for raids on infrastructure such as Karg Island and coastal missile sites. These are not symbolic deployments. They are operational options, yet they also underline the contradiction at the center of the campaign. The president who promised to end endless wars is now confronting the logic of one. Any assault on Iranian export terminals or coastal launch sites risks retaliation against regional bases, Gulf shipping, and allied infrastructure. Even limited raids could trigger a cascade of escalation difficult to reverse. Military planners understand this. Markets certainly do, which helps explain why escalation planning and rhetorical de-escalation are occurring simultaneously. Washington is preparing for expansion while signaling withdrawal, allies as instruments, or excuses. Mr. Trump's suggestion that Britain and NATO partners should take the strait themselves reflects more than irritation. It reflects a structural problem in contemporary American strategy. For decades, alliance leadership meant burden distribution under American command. Increasingly, it means burden transfer without it. The message is unmistakable: if Europe depends on Gulf energy, Europe should defend Gulf shipping. This logic appeals domestically. It aligns with the administration's narrative that allies free ride on American security guarantees. But it carries risks. NATO is not designed for ad hoc maritime enforcement campaigns in contested energy corridors. Nor is Britain positioned to substitute for American naval dominance in Hormuz. What appears as strategic delegation may instead be strategic improvisation. Iran's most effective weapon, time, the most revealing feature of the conflict, is not missile strikes or troop deployments. It is duration. Iran benefits from time because time increases pressure on Western economies. Every additional week of disruption raises insurance premiums, oil prices, and political anxiety in consumer states. Each increment shifts leverage incrementally toward Tehran. This explains why Iranian officials show little urgency about negotiations. A drawn-out confrontation allows them to negotiate from strength rather than desperation. Western diplomats recognize the shift. Early assumptions that Tehran was searching urgently for an off-ramp have faded. Iranian confidence has replaced Iranian caution. Wars intended to force concessions sometimes produce the opposite effect. They clarify resolve. Negotiations without negotiators. The administration insists serious discussions are underway with a more reasonable leadership in Tehran. Iranian officials insist no such talks exist. Both statements may be true. Washington often signals negotiations before they begin to shape expectations. Tehran often denies negotiations until leverage peaks to maximize concessions. Between those positions lies diplomatic ambiguity, useful, elastic, and unverifiable, but ambiguity has limits. A peace agreement requires two parties who both believe they are better off signing than continuing. At present, Iran appears to believe continuation improves its position. That belief alone delays settlement. Oil, the real battlefield, the decisive theater of this war, is not the Persian Gulf. It is a petrol pump. Brent crude approaching $118 a barrel transforms a regional confrontation into a domestic political emergency. Inflation expectations respond faster than aircraft carriers. Approval ratings follow even faster. Polling already suggests the political consequences are visible. Support for the president's economic management has fallen sharply. Even more telling is the decline in approval of his handling of the cost of living, an issue central to his electoral success in modern American politics. Wars rarely end because they are lost abroad. They end because they become expensive at home. Mr. Trump understands this instinctively. It explains why the administration appears increasingly willing to accept partial outcomes rather than decisive ones. Retreat without retreating. The White House now faces a familiar strategic dilemma: escalation risks entanglement, withdrawal risks humiliation. The solution, historically, has been reframing. If the strait remains partially closed but Iran's nuclear program is described as degraded, victory can be declared. If NATO assumes maritime responsibility, burden sharing can be declared. If oil stabilizes, deterrence can be declared. Narratives substitute for outcomes. This approach is not uniquely Trumpian. It reflects a broader shift in American strategy toward managing perceptions rather than territories. Yet it carries a cost. Each reframing reduces credibility slightly. Over time, credibility becomes harder to reconstruct than infrastructure. The paradox of coercive diplomacy. The administration's campaign illustrates a paradox at the heart of coercive diplomacy. Threats work best when they are credible but unused. Once used, they expose limits. By launching strikes intended to compel regime change or capitulation, Washington demonstrated capability. By failing to produce either outcome quickly, it demonstrated constraint. Iran exploited that constraint skillfully. Rather than confronting American strength directly, it targeted global vulnerability. Energy flows are harder to defend than airspace. Markets are harder to stabilize than missile sites. This is an asymmetric strategy at its most effective, a referendum on American primacy. The deeper significance of the conflict lies not in its immediate outcome, but in what it suggests about the future of American power in the Middle East. For decades, Washington assumed escalation dominance, the belief that it could always climb the ladder of force faster than its adversaries. Iran's response suggests something subtler is now true. America may still dominate militarily, but it cannot dominate economically or politically at the same speed. In a globalized energy system, choke points matter as much as carrier groups. Hormuz is not merely a shipping lane. It is a reminder that geography still constrains superpowers. The midterm clock is ticking, the administration's timeline is not strategic but electoral. Every additional week of elevated oil prices erodes domestic support. Every ambiguous objective invites congressional criticism. Every uncertain deployment raises questions about mission clarity. Presidents rarely admit wars are constrained by polling. Yet they often behave as if they are. Mr. Trump's declining approval rating suggests the window for decisive escalation is closing. If the conflict continues without visible gains, the incentive to declare success prematurely will grow. Wars meant to demonstrate strength sometimes end by revealing sensitivity instead. The short war that became a lesson, the campaign against Iran was supposed to last 4 weeks. Instead, it has become a tutorial in the limits of rapid coercion. Tehran still holds its uranium. Hormuz remains unstable. Oil markets remain volatile. Allies remain cautious. Negotiations remain uncertain, and the White House remains caught between escalation and exit. In modern geopolitics, which is often what stalemate looks like. Not trenches. Not ceasefires. But there is a gradual shift from confidence to qualification, from certainty to contingency. The war may end soon, its implications will not.